The Kingdom of Tungning or Kingdom of Formosa was a government that ruled part of southwestern Taiwan between 1661 and 1683. It was founded by Koxinga as part of the Loyalist movement to restore the Ming government in China after it was overthrown by the Manchu Qing dynasty. Koxinga hoped to recapture the Chinese mainland from the Manchus by using the island as a base of operations to settle and train his troops. Names. The Kingdom of Tungning is sometimes known as the Zheng dynasty, Zheng family kingdom or Kingdom of Yanping. Taiwan was referred to by Koxinga as Tungchu. In the West, it was known as the Kingdom of Taiwan, and the period of rule is sometimes referred to as the Koxinga dynasty. History. Capture of Taiwan and establishment of Zheng Kingdom following the defeat of the Ming dynasty. The Manchu King offered several high-ranking officials and military leaders of the Ming positions in the Qing court in exchange of cessation of resistance activities. Zheng Jilong, a Ming admiral and father of Koxinga, accepted the Qing offer, but was later arrested and executed for not ceding control of his military forces to the Qing cause when asked to do so. After learning of this whilst pursuing studies overseas, Koxinga pledged to assume his father's position and control of his remaining forces in order to re-establish Ming control of China. With most of China controlled by the Qing, Koxinga discovered the situational strategic advantages provided by a retreat and occupation of Taiwan from the translator Ho Bin working for the Dutch East India Company, supplied by Ho Bin with maps of the island. Koxinga marshaled his forces estimated at 400 ships and 25,000 soldiers and seized the pescadores so as to utilize them as a strategic staging point from which to invade Taiwan, at the time controlled by the Dutch. In 1661, Koxinga's fleet forced an entry to Lac Gemise, and made landing around Fort Provincia. In less than a year, he captured Fort Provincia and besieged Fort Zeelandia, with no external help coming. Frederick Coyet, the Dutch governor, negotiated a treaty where the Dutch surrendered the fortress and left all the goods and property of the Dutch East India Company behind. In return, most Dutch officials, soldiers and civilians were allowed to leave with their personal belongings and supplies and return to Batavia, ending the 38 years of Dutch colonial rule on Taiwan. Koxinga did, however, detain some Dutch women, children, and priests as prisoners. He then proceeded on a tour of inspection with a contingent of nearly 100,000 soldiers to see with his own eyes the extent and condition of his new domain, realizing that developing his forces in Taiwan into a large enough threat to unseat the king would not be achieved in the short term. Koxinga began transforming Taiwan into a practically proper, albeit preferably temporary, seat of power for the Southern Ming Loyalist movement. Replacing the Dutch system of government previously used in Taiwan, Koxinga instituted a Ming-style administration, the first Chinese governance in Taiwan. This system of government was divided into 6 departments: civil service, revenue, rights, war, punishment, and public works. Great care was taken to symbolize support for the Ming legitimacy, an example being the use of the term Guan instead of Bu to name departments, since the latter is reserved for central government, whereas Taiwan was to be a regional office of the rightful Ming rule of China. Formosa was also renamed by Koxinga as Tungchu, though this name was later changed by his son, Zheng Jing, to Tungning. Development. The most immediate problem Koxinga faced after the successful invasion of Taiwan was a severe shortage of food. It is estimated that, prior to Koxinga's invasion, the population of Taiwan was no greater than 100,000 people. Yet the initial Zheng army with family and retainers that settled in Taiwan is estimated to be 30,000 at minimum. To address the food shortage, Koxinga instituted a Tunchen policy in which soldiers served the dual role of farmer when not assigned active duty in a guard battalion. No effort was spared to ensure the successful implementation of this policy to develop Taiwan into a self-sufficient island, and a series of land and taxation policies were established to encourage the expansion and cultivation of fertile lands for increased food production capabilities. Lands held by the Dutch were immediately reclaimed and ownership distributed amongst Koxinga's trusted staff and relatives to be rented out to peasant farmers, whilst properly developing other farmlands in the south, and the clearing, cultivating and of Aborigine lands to the east was also aggressively pursued. To further encourage expansion into new farmlands, a policy of varying taxation was implemented wherein fertile land newly claimed for the Zheng regime would be taxed at a much lower rate than those reclaimed from the Dutch considered official land. Following the death of Koxinga in 1662 due to malaria, his son Zheng Jing took over the Zheng regime, leading the remaining 7,000 Ming loyalist troops to Taiwan. Differing from Koxinga, it seems Jing attempted to reconcile peacefully with the king by traveling to Peking and bidding for Taiwan to become an autonomous state, but refusing to accept the conditions of compulsory Manchu hairstyle and regular tributes of currency and soldiers. In response to raids by Zheng Jing and in an effort to starve out the forces in Taiwan, the king decreed to relocate all of the southern coastal towns and ports that had been the targets of raids by the Zheng fleet, and thus provided supplies for the resistance. This to a large extent backfired, and from 1662 to 46 major waves of immigration occurred from these areas to Taiwan due to the severe hardships incurred from this relocation policy. In a move to take advantage of this king misstep, Zheng Jing promoted immigration to Taiwan by promising the opportunity for free eastern land cultivation and ownership for peasants in exchange for compulsory military service by all males in case the island should need to be defended against king invaders. About 1,000 previous Ming government officials moved to Taiwan fleeing king persecution. Zheng Jing also recruited his early tutor, Chen Yonghua, and passed to him most official government affairs. This saw the establishment of many important developmental policies for Taiwan in education, agriculture, trade, industry and finance. In addition to a tax system almost as harsh as that of the Dutch colonials, Taiwan soon saw the establishment of Chinese language schools for both the Chinese and indigenous populations in a concerted effort to break Dutch and indigenous religious, language, and other cultural influences, and promotion of Chinese socio-cultural hegemony along with further expansion of towns and farmland into the south and east. This was realized in the eventual closure of all European and therefore Christian schools and churches in Taiwan, the opening of Confucian temples and the institution of the Confucian civil service exams to coincide with the implemented Confucian education system. Chen Yonghua is credited for the introduction of new agricultural techniques, such as water storage for annual dry periods and the deliberate cultivation of sugar cane as a cash crop for trade with the Europeans. In addition to the cooperative unit machinery for mass refining of sugar, the island became more economically self-sufficient with Chen's introduction of mass salt drying by evaporation, creating much higher quality salt than by rock deposits, which were found to be very rare in Taiwan. The Dutch had previously maintained a monopoly of trade of certain goods with the aboriginal tribes across Taiwan, and this monopoly of trade was not only maintained under the Zheng regime, but was actively turned into a quota tribute system of exploitation of the native tribes to aid in international trade. Trade with the British occurred from 1670 through until the end of the Zheng regime, though for the most part limited because of the Zheng monopoly on sugar cane and deer hide, as well as the inability of the British to match the price of East Asian goods for resale. Aside from the British, Zheng major trade occurred with the Japanese and Dutch, though evidence of trade with many Asian countries exists. Death of Zheng Jing and Qing invasion. Following the death of Zheng Jing in 1681, the lack of an official heir meant rule of Taiwan would pass to his illegitimate son. This caused great division in the government and military powers, resulting in an exceptionally destructive struggle for succession. Seizing the advantage presented by the infighting, the king dispatched their navy with Xilang at the head, destroying the Zheng fleet at the Penghu Islands. In 1683, after the Battle of Penghu, Qing troops landed in Taiwan. Zheng Kexuang gave in to the Qing dynasty's demand of surrender, and his kingdom was incorporated into the Qing Empire as part of Fujian province, ending 2 decades of rule by the Zheng family. Several Ming dynasty princes accompanied Koxinga to Taiwan, including the Prince of Ningjing Zhu Chugua and Prince Zhu Hongguan Wzh, son of Zhu Yihai. The king sent the 17 Ming princes still living on Taiwan back to mainland China, where they spent the rest of their lives. Zheng Kexuang was rewarded by the King Emperor with the title Duke of Haicheng, and he and his soldiers were inducted into the 8 Banners. The king used Koxinga's former Rattan Shield troops who were placed in the 8 Banners against Russian Cossacks at Albazine. Royal family. Queen Tang, who had no son, was King Zheng Jing's Shitsu. Bibliography. Davidson, James W. Chapter 4. The Kingdom of Koxinga. 1662–1683. The Island of Formosa, Past and Present. History, People, Resources, and Commercial Prospects. Tea, camphor, sugar, gold, coal, sulfur, economical plants, and other productions. London and New York. Macmillan. OCLC 1,887,893. OL 6931635M.